Hi, my name is Daniel Weiser. I'm the state and national editor at the Daily Tar Heel, and welcome to our new video series. It's called In 10, where we're going to have kind of a 10-minute breakdown of the relevant news topics of the day. And we're going to have a panel here each time on the video to kind of discuss the topic and break it down for you. And we have a great panel today. Today's going to be the Elections in 10 video. And so I'm going to now introduce our panel. And here's starting with Professor Guillory.
I'm Ferrel Guillory. I'm a professor of the practice in journalism at UNC Chapel Hill.
I'm Tom Jensen. I'm the Director of Public Policy Polling in Raleigh.
My name is Mitch Kokai. I am Director of Communications for the John Locke Foundation based in Raleigh.
And thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today. Well, just first off, Professor Guillory, I want to ask you, I know I've talked to you a lot before about how the voters in the state have changed over time. I know you've mentioned to me that you think this year, actually, that North Carolina might elect a Democrat for president, but a Republican for governor. I know that's something that's changed over time. So I just wanted to ask you, first off, could you kind of describe kind of the history and how voters in the state have changed over time and their mindsets?
Well, that would take a lot more than 10 minutes. But let me make two quick points. One is that the electorate in North Carolina has swelled as our population has swelled, and so we've gone, I looked it up, from 5 million people to nearly 10 million people since 1972, and then we've gone from 2 million voters to more than 6 million voters since 1972. And so we've got a larger electorate. And I think the other thing that has changed is that through the 70s, 80s, and to some extent the 90s, North Carolina had a lot of swing voters. People were changing parties. They were voting, a little Republican here, a little Democratic there. Now, over the last decade or so, the voters in this state have become increasingly locked into whether they're a Democratic voter or a Republican voter. Even those that register independent actually perform as Democratic voters or Republican voters, and we only have a small slice of genuine swing voters.
Okay, interesting. And Mr. Jensen, I know you released a poll, I think it was last week, or your organization did, looking at kind of just the state of the presidential race right now. And I believe that President Obama had a 3-point lead, but I guess a virtual tie if you kind of factor in the margin of error. But I think the interesting is you looked at kind of how each presidential candidate is doing among people who are natives of the state and people who have moved in recently. And it seemed that Obama had an edge among recent kind of immigrants to the state. So I wanted to see if you could talk a little bit more about that and how that's changed the dynamic of the state.
Yeah, the really interesting thing we found on that poll was that people who have lived here for less than 10 years support Obama 66-27, which is partially a reflection of young voters being so Democratic leaning, but it's also a reflection of in-migration is now helping Democrats in the state. People are moving here from blue states like California, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and they're coming here and in many cases voting Democratic for president. And then the other thing that's kind of interesting is obviously everywhere in the country in 2008 there was a big divide between how young people voted and how seniors voted. But that was a bigger divide here in North Carolina than anywhere else in the country. Seniors voted for John McCain by 13 points according to the exit polls. Voters under 30 voted for Obama by 44 points. So there was a 57-point divide based on under 30 over 65, and that's why I think that this newfound swing state status that North Carolina has kind of developed the last two presidential elections is probably something that's here to stay. I don't think you're going to see another situation anytime soon like in 2004 where Democrats just gave up on the state at the beginning of September and there basically was no presidential campaign here the last 2 months.
Okay, interesting. Mr. Kokai, I know I've seen you in the media recently talk about the effect that Mitt Romney picking Paul Ryan as a vice presidential candidate could have on voters in the state. Is that something you think that could galvanize some of the conservative base in the state and kind of boost turnout election day? I know there's been some concerns too about how that might affect the independent voters in the state as well. I just want to get your thoughts on that.
There could be a couple of different effects from this. One, I think it will help get the conservatives excited about Mitt Romney. Now, among conservatives, generally they like Paul Ryan, so they're much more excited about the ticket. The other effect could be among liberals who were going to vote for Barack Obama anyway, but might have not been as scared about Mitt Romney as they are about Paul Ryan because they think he's more radical and more extreme. Perhaps that gets them more energized to get out as well. In terms of the people who haven't yet decided, and Ferrel mentioned that that's a smaller and smaller portion of our electorate, but among those, it's hard to say where they're going to swing. If the Democrats can be successful in portraying Ryan as extreme, that might help Democrats in the state and the presidential ticket. If instead the Republicans could say, look, here's a guy who's serious about dealing with the long-term problems that we have, then that could be a positive for the Republicans, getting that little sliver of voters who haven't decided which way they're going to go.
Right. So I guess it's still to be decided what type of effect that'll have. Interesting. Another thing I wanted to talk to you about too, obviously it's interesting to our viewers, is the youth vote. Obviously that was a big thing, as Mr. Jensen, you talked about in 2008. And I think in your most recent poll, it said that young voters in the state, aged 18 to 29, still support Obama by a 62 to 30% margin. But I guess the question too this time is, are they going to come out and vote this time around? So I wanted to get all of your thoughts on where you think the youth vote will go in this election.
Well, I'm not sure in this sense. The youth vote in this election is different from the youth vote 4 years ago, and it's for an obvious reason. People are 4 years older, so that 18-year-olds who voted last time are 22-year-olds now. And so to some extent, the challenge for the Obama campaign that needs a high rate of return, as it were, from young voters. They've got at least half of the youth vote, between 18 and 26, were out of the electorate last time. So they've got to motivate a new batch of voters, and I think that's the big challenge facing the Obama campaign right now.
What we're finding in our polling is that young voters have the same level of enthusiasm about this election as the average voter. But that's a big shift from 2008, when young voters were much more enthusiastic about voting than the average voter. So I don't think you're necessarily going to see a situation where youth turnout sort of drops below historical norms, but it might go back to sort of average norms, whereas 2008 was sort of an aberration in terms of the high level of excitement. I still think Obama's going to overwhelmingly win the young vote. That's what we're finding in most of our polling. He'll win it by a 20-30 point margin, but whereas it was more like 15-16% of the vote was under 30 in 2008, it might be more like 12-13% of the vote is under 30 in 2012, and in a close election that could make the difference.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't think the partisan split's going to be much different. Those who were younger voters are still going to support Barack Obama. I think those who voted for him last time, who were in the youth vote, might not be as excited about him for a couple of reasons. One, the economy has really tanked. I mean, it was bad when he took office, and he was right to criticize the economic policies when he ran, but his policies haven't turned out to be much more successful. The unemployment rate's higher than it was projected to be. I think the other thing, too, is that there's nothing new about Barack Obama. Last time it was, hey, listen to this guy, he sounds great, he sounds like he is going to be a new way of operating business. We're going to put all of this stuff that Washington does that we don't like aside. And I think after 4 years of having him in office, there's less of that sense that this is someone new and different and a game changer, and more of, okay, we've seen still some gridlock and lots of partisan battling, and a lot of people just don't like that. It turns them off. Sometimes it turns out that they don't vote.
But here's where the Ryan selection as vice president, I think, may make a difference. And that is, it shifts the election from being totally a referendum on Obama, which is the description you were just putting on it, Mitch, and it turns it somewhat more toward being a choice between really different visions of how the country should move over the next 4 years. And so,
and that's definitely the take the Democrats are trying to put forward right now, saying, look, Ryan's extreme, you don't want that, stick with us, even if you're not completely thrilled with the way things have gone. We're on the right track. He would put us on the wrong track.
But my point is I think it makes it more difficult for the Romney campaign to make it a pure referendum election. And you're right. The Democrats want it to be more of a choice election, but I think the Ryan selection plays into making it a choice election more than a referendum on the incumbent.
Okay. And just a last question for you all. I think it was just announced recently that the unemployment rate for the state, in July, it ticked up a couple percentage points to 9.6%. And obviously the economy is one of the issues that's talked about a lot for this election. How do you think that might play into voters' minds this fall?
Well, I've just been reading some material on the state's economy, and you've got an economy in this state that's going in two directions at once. Unemployment's too high. We don't have enough jobs to satisfy the growing population, and our poverty rate has gotten much too high. We had gotten poverty down to about 11% a decade ago, and it's gone back up to back to almost 1980s levels. So we've got some real problems out there, but at the same time, we've got growth continuing. What's called GSP, gross state product, still climbing in our new sectors, chemicals, medical manufacturing, financial services. And so for well-skilled people, there are still job opportunities in this state. And so, to some extent, we've got an economy going up and down at the same time. And so it isn't, in terms of both campaigning and public policy decision making, it's not a one-dimensional economy.
I think the economy will be the decisive issue in November for the small percentage of voters that remains undecided, but I don't think it's going to be really driven by what the latest unemployment number is or what the latest jobs report says, so much as those 10% of voters, what's the situation in their own household? Do they really feel like Barack Obama did everything that he could to get the economy turned around and do the right thing for their families? Or to get the kind of change that they need? Do they feel like there does have to be a change in the White House? Obama had his chance and we're going to give it to Romney now. And it's sort of hard to say, what camp in terms of how those small number of swing voters are, sort of how they are being affected.
I think the old rule of thumb was the incumbent can't get reelected if the unemployment rate's higher than 8%. I don't know that that's going to hold this time around, because what might be more likely to be a factor is if the unemployment rate is still higher than 8%, but people have a perception that things are moving in the right direction, that will certainly help the president. The Romney camp, of course, is going to throw out every statistic they can that the economy is much worse now, not only than it was when he took over, but much worse than it should be at this point in a recovery from a recession. So they'll be relying on that and hoping people that will actually feel that in their own lives or see that in what's happening to their neighbors, whereas President Obama's message will be, look, we know we came in a really bad situation. We've already gone through the depths of the recession. Things are on the right track now. We're growing. If you put me in office for another 4 years and I have a Congress that'll work with me, then we can get some policies moving that'll keep us moving on this right track that we're on now. And it'll just be a case of the voters deciding which of those messages that they actually buy. And as both Ferrel and Tom have mentioned, the key is going to be those swing voters in the middle. Which message do they support? Because there are a lot of people who like President Obama, want him to stay in office. There are a lot of people who don't like President Obama, and they're going to turn out to vote against him. What are those people in the middle? What do they think about this situation? And so the key message for both parties is say the things that are going to get your base out, but then also say some things that are going to appeal to those people who haven't made up their minds yet.
Sure. Okay. Well, Pan, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. And yeah, thanks for watching online.